Welcome to my fail of trying to get the rod command from a Indian chief to work on the Indian Scout. But let me show you the progress that I had so far. I was trying to get this to work a couple days ago, and I was struggling because I wasn't getting any data across the diagnostic port here. Previously, I did this on my 2022 Indian Chief Dark Horse. I was able to pull data off of the diagnostic port via the CAN bus. Right now I do not have my screen attached, but let me show you what happened on the Indian Scout. So we got the Scout screen here, and we have the rod command from an Indian Chief. Both of these devices use the same connector. There. Here's the Chief display connector, and here is the Scout's display connector. The device I use between these two is this. This is a Adafruit RP2040 with an MCP, I believe 2515 chip. It's a CAN bus chip, and these two wires are the CAN high and the CAN low, and it's connected on the port only on two connections right there, CAN high and CAN low, to those two wires right there, the green and the yellow. On the Chief, we have 4 of these wires, but it uses the exact same pinout. So I have it connected to the bike. We have the software SavvyCAN is what I use to connect to the bike to see the data come across the port. So right now you can see it says that I'm connected, right? So in theory, when I turn this on, we should see data. Bike's on. But the problem is I wasn't getting any data across the screen. But when I come over to the Indian Chief, you can see there is no screen connected. I have a connection on the computer, hit the power button. That's all the data. So eventually this is gonna time out because I don't have the screen connected. I don't have my key fob near the bike, and I do not have a way to put in the pin code. So the bike is going to just time out. Give it a second. There it is, the bike's shutting off, okay? The bike shut off because, again, we didn't get past the security aspect of the bike. In theory, this should work on the Indian Scout, right? This is where I ran into a very confusing situation because these are both Indian motorcycles. In theory, it should work. I should be able to plug in off that port. This is what the technicians use. They use digital wrench. They just plug in and it pulls that information. So I put the tank on, I put the headlight on, I put the hand controls on, everything that I thought this is what could make the data come across the wire. Maybe being that these things weren't connected, it wouldn't, allow that data across the wire. Not true. Let me show you what I figured out. For the CAN bus, there's something called a bit rate. And in this code, you have to set that bit rate. Or rather, you can set it to automatically figure that out. But in this specific case, the bit rate is not the same between an Indian Scout and these Indian Chiefs. The bit rate for the Indian Chief is 500 kilobits a second, and I found that the bit rate for the Indian Scout is 250 kilobits per second. That is very important. So we're going to change my code to 250 kilobits per second, and I'm going to recompile this, and so that's going to allow this little device to run at a separate bit rate, which is going to allow us to see the data on the Indian Chief, and it's also going to allow me to show you what happens when you plug this thing into an Indian Scout. I just confused myself. This is going to allow us to see the data on the Indian Scout because we're running it at the correct bit rate. Okay, sorry, this stuff gets really confusing. We're going to go back into SavvyCAN. We can see that we're connected. We're going to clear out all these frames from the Indian Chief, and we're going to run this again. Okay. And what's interesting about it is the lack of data that we get compared to the Indian Chief. There we go. So you can see there, this is a lot less data coming across the wire compared to the Indian Chief, because the Indian Chief has the wireless control module. It has the vehicle control module. It has multiple modules that are sending data across that CAN bus. Versus really on the Indian Scout, you just have the ECM. I mean, yeah, you got other sensors, you got the wheel speed sensor, front and rear, you got the ABS module, but this bike has so much more tech in it, so it's gonna have more messages that are coming across the CAN bus at any given moment, which is why this bike is running at 500 kilobits a second to accept more data across the CAN bus. And this bike is only running at 250 kilobits a second because it has less data going across the CAN bus. Now, where it gets even weirder, let me show you what happens when I plug in the screen. As I've said before, these bikes run 100% without the screens. Yes, you can't do certain things without the screens, but they can start and function without them. Okay, so the screen's now connected. We can see we really didn't get any new messages on the screen. Okay, now let me show you what happens when I plug in the ride command screen to the Indian Scout. All right, so we got the ride command screen. Whoop. There it is, it powered on. Something interesting is about to happen. So we're going to get to the welcome screen here shortly. See, we got a chassis fault. We're not damaging anything. So we're going to hit OK. So the ride command screen at this current time is on the Scout. It's on there. Okay, we can go through the settings, go to bike. Obviously, we don't have the same fuel level technology on the Indian Scout or the 2024 and below Indian Scout compared to the Indian Chief and the 2025 Scout. So we're not going to get fuel range. We are getting battery voltage, but my mileage has not updated from the Indian Scout to that ride command because the messaging on this bike is different. But here's what's even more interesting. Okay, there's no more data. Watch when I disconnect this. Disconnect the screen. Okay, all right, so we're gonna restart this. We're pulling that data again. The bike's on, we're good. The throttle body under the tank is chirping, we're good. Let me show you what happens over here when I plug the ride command screen in. Oh, that's not the ride command. When I plug the ride command screen in. So I just plugged in the screen. We're looking at the data come across the wire and it immediately shuts down. So we've lost all that data again. What I think is happening, unfortunately, whoa, please don't fall. That would not be fun. That's a very expensive screen. What I think is happening is the screen is causing a bit rate miscommunication on the CAN bus and is shutting down the CAN bus. Okay, oh, it just turned white. What I found in the documentation, this screen runs at 250 kilobits a second. But again, the CAN bus for the Indian Chief runs at 500 kilobits a second. What I also think could be happening, the screen is having an issue not knowing where the WCM is for the Indian Chief. The WCM, again, on this bike, it is what handles the security. It looks for the pin code and it looks for the key fob. If it finds it, it allows you into the rest of the bike. Being that it doesn't have that over here on the Scout, you plug it in, I'm assuming that the screen is essentially just shutting down. It says, hey, I didn't get any of this. I can't contact the WCM. I'm just going to shut down. And then it ends up shutting down the entire CAN bus. That's kind of where I am right now. The good news is some of the messages that I decoded from the Indian Chief are the same on the Indian Scout. The gear position sensor, I believe the crank sensors, the throttle position sensor, they're the exact same. So I don't have to go back and find those messages. So you can see, kind of hard to see, but some of these are all the messages that were already decoded on the bike. So like gear position sensor, for instance, the bike is in first gear. I don't have to go back and try to figure that out. You can see the throttle body position. Yeah, so that's cool. It's not all is lost. It's just, I'm hoping that it's a simple, the screen can't detect the module, but if I'm able to inject the same messages or similar messages that that module is spitting out, which is going to be very difficult. Honestly, I'm starting to think that this isn't possible. It explains why when some people bought the ride command screen just to plug it in and it powered on and nothing else happened, that's because that screen is possibly shutting down the CAN bus on the bike because of that miscommunication, or the fact that it does not detect the security module on the bike and it's just bricking itself until you have to restart it. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit of it. Like I said, I'm still working at this because what we have to do, we have to get the messages from this bike, decode them, and then decode the messages on this bike, and then try to essentially replicate the messages between the bikes to try to get it to work on this bike. So that's where we're at. Let me know what y'all think down below. If you have some experiences with CAN buses, let me know down below. I don't think, again, you cannot take a sensor or a node that is made to operate on a different bit rate and try to make it run on another bit rate. It's programmed and hard coded to run on that specific bit rate. But being that that screen can run on the 250 kilobit bit rate, it makes me wonder if it's still possible on the Scout, and maybe it's just because that module's not there is what's causing that problem. The Scouts don't have these modules, the newer ones do. You can't just plug that module in because the ECM has to know about that module. The ECM is passing data between those modules, and this ECM doesn't know that that thing even exists, which is why you can't plug the cruise control directly into this bike from the newer one. It doesn't know that it exists. So yeah, I'm gonna keep back at it. Catch y'all in the next one. Peace.